My guests today are Ken Cartson, the Senior Vice President for Public Sector at Trellix, and Britt Norwood, the Senior Vice President for Global Channel, also at Trellix. Ken, Britt, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. The May 2021 Cyber Executive Order from President Biden ordered agencies, among many things, that they shall deploy an endpoint detection and response, or EDR, initiative to support proactive detection of cybersecurity incidents within the federal government infrastructure, active cyber hunting, containment and remediation, and incident response. The guidance from OMB, just about 6 or so months later, details that requirement to ensure that these EDR tools meet CISA's technical requirements and are deployed across the enterprise. OMB says this approach is intended to maintain a diversity of different EDR tools throughout the government that support agencies in different technological environments while ensuring a baseline of insight into activity across federal civilian agencies. There is a lot more to that executive order, a lot more we're going to talk about today, but we're going to start at the beginning. EDR, some call it maybe XDR, it all depends on I guess where you sit, but this is all part of a key move for agencies toward along their zero trust journey, and that's where my guests come in. So let me start with Ken from Trellix. Ken, what are some of those public sector trends we're starting to see around the EO, around other cybersecurity that really is driving this discussion, whether about EDR or other areas?
Yeah, great question, Jason, and thank you. I think we're seeing a lot of activity, in an environment where the .gov, the agencies and departments are extremely fragmented. There's an opportunity here within CISA and CDM to bring a lot of capabilities together and better protect the government against nation state actors and foreign adversaries, utilizing a technology that's more advanced and can help them see key indicators and actually respond to attacks while they're in motion. And I think a lot of people are familiar with attacks like SolarWinds, which came in through, an infrastructure that already existed, supply chain, and leveraging EDR is a great capability, very different, and not to correct, but very different from XDR potentially. Whereas EDR sits at the endpoint, it is detection, it is response. Whereas XDR sits in more of a SOC framework that enables detection throughout your cloud infrastructure, your network, and your endpoint for response through any of the tools that you may have already invested in. And having an ecosystem that leverages earlier investments is really critical because, as much as we talk about, technology refreshes and modernization, the reality is you'll always have a legacy infrastructure. And I'm sure we'll talk more about legacy data centers, even though you have the move to cloud. But to really poignantly answer your question on what we're seeing from the .gov is a very strategic sourcing of EDR technologies throughout the .gov environment. And I think it is very important that they are utilizing multiple technologies to protect their framework. One technology in general does not protect against everything, and there is no silver bullet. So having different layers of defense is absolutely critical, and having them integrate with the CISA infrastructure and dashboard so they can see in real time what is occurring in their environment and thwart any attacks that may exist or happening is also critically important, and to share that information across the .gov. So with that, we are seeing the activity. We're starting to see the deployments start to happen. We've already seen a lot of acquisitions occur. Now the deployments are happening, and we will continue to see that, we believe, over the next probably 12 to 24 months. It's going to take a little while to catch up and make sure every endpoint is protected.
Can I appreciate the breaking down the difference between EDR and XDR? I got to admit, I did a quick search and they seem to be the same to me, but I'm no cyber expert, so I appreciate that better definition to really help level set. The one thing I'll just ask you to kind of maybe expand upon is, for years we've heard about defense in depth and this idea that, got to put the moat around the castle and the higher wall, and what we've heard over the last year and a half, 2 years is that defense in depth idea just isn't realistic anymore, and it's more about the endpoints. When you say defense in layers, it's just maybe a new kind of defense in depth where you start with the endpoint versus the network. Do I have that kind of
Yeah, I think that's a good way to articulate it, quite honestly. I think what we've discovered over time is, we had an infrastructure where you had this hard, crunchy exterior. You had firewalls and IPS at the gateway of your network. Then you had those things internally as well. And then you also had your endpoint infrastructure and protection. What we've come to discover is there's ways into everything. As we've moved from a data center centric environment to the cloud, we can't even stand up those types of gateway infrastructures. We try with some zero trust capabilities, but it's not realistic in general. Although it still is important to put some gates there in order to ensure there is some minimal layers of protection and visibility to your environment. That said, when you do get down to the endpoint, that is where people feel their most critical data actually resides. Yes, they want to catch it going across the network. Hopefully it's encrypted already. If it's not, it's being recorded and looked at. But when you get to the endpoint, that's where all your critical data resides. That's where the gold is. That's where the attackers are trying to get to, whether that endpoint is a desktop, it's a laptop, or it's a server.
Brett, let me bring you into the discussion because we spend a lot of time at Federal News Network focusing on the federal side, but the commercial, and I've heard this from friends in the commercial world, that the zero trust architecture, the zero trust efforts by the federal government, in many ways, has also given the commercial side a real good map, a roadmap to kind of improve their cybersecurity. What are some of those similar trends you're seeing on the commercial side?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. Obviously, the most attacked vertical in the world is the government, right? And so they were probably having to be on the cutting edge of a lot of the different technologies that they're using to defend themselves. But there are obviously commercial applications that are coming over. What we're really starting to see is where some of the more high profile attacks were taking place, years ago, in very well-known organizations in the Fortune 500, starting to move down market. And you're starting to see things like from the attacker side, where they're finding zero-day attacks and then they're selling them to all bidders who want to use them to take advantage of that. And the reality is, with the cloud adoption that you've seen across enterprise, we're all using the same tools right now, regardless of the size of a company, right? A small company could be using Salesforce as much as a large company can, or Workday. So they're equally vulnerable, but it's like, how do they defend themselves is becoming a bigger challenge. So some of the trend lines that we're starting to see is, obviously there is a growing market for a managed offering around EDR and around XDR as well. So that has obviously been a big focus, for us over the last year, is just really getting our tools set up to be leveraged the way our customers need to leverage them. And that's what they're asking for. But Ken is absolutely right. EDR is very much in the endpoint world, and you've got to defend the endpoint, but you need all those layers of protection. But the real trick now is, like, how do you tie all those layer of protections together and get a single source of truth so you know where the real threats are?
When you talk to your commercial or your private sector partners and clients, do they refer back to the federal zero trust strategy, or maybe not in those terms, but they talk about it in a way that what they're talking about?
Yeah, you definitely, a lot of it is what I would call a well-known best practice. And you'll get a lot of questions about that. And many times, especially if they do business around the federal government, they have a lot of questions about FedRAMP certifications and have we gone through all the necessary qualifications on the Fed side. So you definitely do see that permeating throughout the marketplace. And, it's certainly something that people are definitely paying attention to.
We talked a little bit about zero trust in the executive order, XDR, EDR. When maybe Ken jump back in here, this conversation, part of the conversation is, what are some of the questions you're getting from your federal clients and your federal customers? Are they asking, when they talk about their zero trust journey, what are you seeing in terms of what they need or where they're at?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I see most, and this is really the right way to approach it, it's an architecture. It's not a simple product solution. It's not one widget that will solve, all the threats that are coming at you. It is centric around endpoint. Your endpoint can be anywhere, though. It can be your device. It can be a cloud infrastructure. It could be an AMI. So taking that thought into perspective when you're creating an architecture that brings all of those into play, which, further extenuates the XDR comparison and how do I extend the capability? And that's one of the things they're looking at. I think Britt brings up an excellent point where the federal government is probably under attack more than any other entity globally. And when we talk about modernization and the capabilities such as FedRAMP, which he brought up, and NIST, and best practices for both government and for industry, there's a major conundrum. You want the most advanced technologies in order to protect, which is what that executive order is about. But the obstacles or barrier to entry from a OEM perspective or a vendor perspective are pretty difficult. They are substantiated, they are necessary in order to have those controls so that the protection layers exist and then you can't be compromised as a solution. But it does limit the ability or the capabilities that the government may have access to. We're very lucky. I mean, we have a great FedRAMP program internally at Trellix. All of our endpoint products are under FedRAMP from a moderate high, and it will be IL5 in the next few months. That includes EDR and XDR. Not a lot of companies can say that, and that limits the number of solutions that the government has access to.
I've heard that many times before, that there's a frustration among agencies because of the slowness of FedRAMP. And, let's not pick on FedRAMP. They're doing the best they can with limited resources. But I think the more agencies can understand what is out there, the better that they can push FedRAMP to, hey, get this through the process or get this done. You mentioned the IL5 piece. Is that something that you've been asked for from civilian agencies, from DoD, from all agencies looking for that higher level?
So IL5, the DoD has similar requirements that civilian has, or .gov. .gov, they call them moderate and high. In DoD, they call them impact levels. So 2 would be moderate, 4 would be the next one. They skip 3, ironically. 5 would be most of the network, and then 6 and 7, you're getting into secret and classified areas of the government. The controls are very similar. They're just more extensive as you go on. And really, I use the word conundrum, and it is because it's the right thing to do from the government's perspective. They work their butt offs in order to have controls in place that are effective at thwarting the enemy. But there's a lot of work that has to be done to get all of the solutions that are available in the marketplace into a FedRAMP environment or an impact level environment. It's just a ton of work. It's similar to the certifications of the past. There needs to be some momentum put around it, and I think we'll get there.
I know Congress is even trying to get involved here, which is, we could have a whole different conversation, Ken and Britt, about that. But I think a lot of people recognize the importance of FedRAMP. We're just on a break, so let's take a quick break. We can come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion, Evolution of Detection and Response in the Public Sector, sponsored by Trellix on Federal News Network.